Good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of Thinking Thursday. I'm your host, Bronwyn Lucas, the caring counselor with Able Counseling and Consulting. And Thinking Thursday is a time for us to look at our mental health, but we look at it from so many different ways because you see, your mental health impacts every area of your life. And I like to remind people that your mental health is not separate from your health. Health is health. And as we think about our health, we think about the things that make us feel good. We're thinking about things that just impact our life. So tonight, we are going to talk about Black history. I really thought about whether I do the show tonight or not because so much was going on. And fortunately, I heard from many of you, oh no, you need to do the show tonight because we need things to feel normal. So thank you for those comments that it's part of your normal. I am so glad to hear that and so glad that I'm able to do that. So tonight, as I said, we will talk about Black history. But we always, if you've been here before, we must start with some breathing. And so, if you've never been here before, let me tell you why we start with breathing. Well, as you learn to breathe and woosah and have that moment, it allows you to clear your head, refocus from whatever is going on. So that's what we want to do. We want to do that. So let me tell you how. Here is how you will have the opportunity to just breathe. I want you to breathe in when I say breathe in, and you're going to breathe in and you are going to breathe in through your nose and you're going to breathe out through your mouth. You're going to breathe in slowly as I count slowly and breathe out slowly as I count slowly. We're going to do 3 deep breaths. So let's get started. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. Have a good woosah moment. At the time of this show's original airing, we're here in Texas in a winter storm like many of us have not seen in our lives. Things have been shut down, roads have been closed, we've been iced over. We've had more than, I forget what, 1,000 hours of, 100 plus hours of cold. We're not used to it here. So for us to stay below freezing for a week is monumental. So we are here and we don't know what to do with it. So we definitely needed that woosah moment. So if you're here, give me a shout out. Hello, Denise. I see you are on tonight. So if you're here, take a moment to share. Scroll down beneath the picture and you will see the share button. So share this. As I said, tonight we're going to talk about Black history. Why? Well, I wanted to keep the show light yet informative, and after all, it is Black History Month. So I wanted it to be light, wanted it to be informative, wanted us to have a chance to have some fun with it. So that's why the particular topic that we have. So I want to look at there's so much. When you think about Black history, oh my gosh, that could be so many things. And in 45 minutes, you can only do so much. So I decided I'd focus on 3 different areas or issues that are an important part and just something fun to look at it. I wanted tonight to just be fun because, like I say, at the timing of this show, man, we've been without power, we've been without water, we've had water, we haven't had power. It's gone back and forth. We're cold, we're sick of being in the house. Now, on top of COVID, we have snow on the streets and we don't drive on snow. Woosah, all that going on. I wanted it to be a light show. So I thought I'd talk about three things. First one, not so light, but I'll explain why in a minute. And that is slavery in America, the Harlem Renaissance, and the importance of music in our community, in our culture. So let's get started. Like I say, if you're here, give a shout out, say hello, and I'll recognize you. And definitely share the show. Now, when I say I want to do a show that's lighthearted, and I'm talking about slavery in the beginning, that does not sound lighthearted. But let me tell you why I chose that as my jumping off point. So many people want to think that we should forget slavery ever existed, we shouldn't talk about it, it's too bad, it's too this, it's too that. It is a part of our culture, it is a part of American history, it is real. So we cannot ignore that slavery existed. Um, we can also not ignore that Africans arrived in this country 100 years before slavery began. The first, let me see if anybody out there who's listening, if you know who is considered or credited with being the first African to show up on American soil, the first documented, and there were some even before the 1500s. The person I'm going to tell you in a second, I'll see if anybody knows. But I will tell you that we think of slavery in 1619 was when the first Africans arrived. No. Juan Garrido was a conquistador, but he was born in West Africa. And then he later on moved to Lisbon, Portugal, and then he moved to Spain and he traveled with the conquistadors. Many Africans traveled with the conquistadors. Some were slaves, some were free. When in the time of the conquistadors, you could earn your freedom, you could buy land. So it's not known for sure if he was actually a slave or a free person, depending on where you read what it's going to say. But the first documented African to don North American soil was Juan Garrido in 1538. And so someone said, Juan, who? I will tell you, I'll spell it Garrido, Garrido, Juan Garrido. Now, he settled in Mexico, but he was the first documented African with name to come here, work, own the land, and be his own person in 1538. Now, what's interesting when I looked at the history going prior to slavery of Africans in America, in 1526, enslaved Africans were a part of the Spanish expedition to establish an outpost in the North American coast in what is now South Carolina. There were Africans a part of that expedition. Now, they launched a rebellion in November of that year and effectively destroyed the Spanish settlers' ability to sustain the settlement, which they abandoned a year later, nearly 100 years before the Jamestown Africans came to be known as the enslaved. So Africans were here long before slavery. They were here doing their thing. And I thought it was important to know that because we often think of our beginning in this country just as slaves. And when we think about our beginning as a people, yes, we could talk about our rich African heritage. The reason I'm not doing it, as I said, tonight, 45 minutes. I want to keep it light. I want to keep the focus tonight on, man, what is it? What were some important things we need to know? As I said, so many people want to ignore that slavery ever existed and say we shouldn't talk about it, it's over, it just brings back ill feelings. But something we can learn from our Jewish brothers and sisters when they think about the Holocaust, they say never let them forget. They're not going to forget what happened. Just because something bad happened in your past doesn't mean you forget it. You don't have to be bound by the negative thoughts, the negative feelings that you would have by this issue, but you do not have to forget it. You hold on to what it is, you hold on to the positive because you can, because it's important to know. Um, it's very important to know what can we learn from that. There is the idea that if you don't know your history, you repeat it. The original quote is, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. If we don't know the things that happen, we don't want to go back to them, but we can learn from it. We can see what a strong people we are when we study slavery. One of the things, in Texas um, textbooks, the term slavery, what isn't there? It is involuntary servitude or indentured servant. Slaves were neither, it was slavery. And when we look at chattel slavery in America, we need to call it what it is. When you begin to water down something, it loses its importance. Now, the one fact I really wanted to focus on slavery was this. So many people focus on the fact that in Africa we were sold by Africans to others, and that's how many ended up here. That is true. But usually when people quote that, they miss the fact that the selling of people, as horrible as we see it, was a common practice. Slavery was relatively widespread throughout West Africa during this area of the Atlantic slave trade, but it was fundamentally different from the chattel slavery in America. So when they were selling each other, yes, that did happen. It wasn't being sold into what we see today in the chattel slavery we know of. They didn't know how they were selling their people, and you can say, well, that's lame. How did they not know? That's real. The slavery that they were sold into was not what we experience today, what we experience in this country and know today to be this chattel slavery. So, when you quote that we see we were just as guilty, we sold ourselves into slavery. Understand the history. And I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying it is what it is. And we need to be aware and be able to tell the whole story. Um, but we need to study that. We need to teach our children the reality of it. It is a reality. It is an ugly part of this country's history. There are other parts of our country's history, especially when it deals with African Americans, that is ugly. But ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Ignoring it doesn't make it any less real. It is real. And when we deal with it and understand how real it is, we can learn from it, we can grow from it, and we will not be bound by seeing it as something as negative, seeing it as something we have to hide from. I rather us see it as something that we say is, wow, I'm not hiding from it. I'm proud of it because we are a strong people. Look at what we came through. So we begin to see it as that. We can take control of this narrative. It's ours. Know about the Middle Passage. Teach your children about the Middle Passage. How long it lasted. How many Africans were taken during that time? How many died? How many killed themselves because they knew what they were going into was nothing like they ever could imagine? So how many jumped overboard? How many were thrown overboard because they died in the passage from Africa to America? So know this history, understand this history. It's ours. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. I just wanted to really point that out because it's very important to me because I see so many people saying, man, we can't talk about that. That's just too dark, too ugly. It's real, it's us, own it, and let's embrace it. Let's understand what a strong people we were to overcome it. So enough about that part of our history. But as I said, I never want us to forget. Um, so I want to talk to you about two other things, and that is the creative side of us, and that's the Harlem Renaissance. And then we're going to talk about how music has been important. And one other comment, RBG Queen says, we weren't sold, we were traded spoils, and that is true. But it was a little of both. We were traded as spoils. We were not. It was so many ugly things that happened to get us here. But let's switch to the creative side of us and the Harlem Renaissance. As I said, tonight I want to just look at some of the lighthearted, good things celebrating our history and who we are as a people. The Harlem Renaissance, um, the Harlem Renaissance was a development of the Harlem neighborhood, an era in Harlem, New York. It was known as a cultural mecca of the 21st century. Harlem Renaissance lasted from around the 1910s through the mid 1930s. It was considered the golden age of African culture. Um, there was a proliferation of literature, music, performing arts, cultural arts. It was an awesome time. Now, during this time, you had the migration, and many Africans ended up from the south to the north, and many ended up in Harlem. And originally, um, they were it was a white neighborhood, an upper class white neighborhood. That's what Harlem was in the 1880s. But you know what happens when we come to a neighborhood. They leave, we come, they go. And as they begin to move out due to overdevelopment, blacks began to move in, and then there were empty buildings, and landlords needed to fill them, and we needed a place to stay. And that's how we got to Harlem, part of that great migration. In the early 1900s, middle class black families moved from what was known as Black Bohemia, another neighborhood of that time. They moved to Harlem, and as I said, as they moved in, the whites moved out, um, and that's how it occurred. So around 1915 and 1916. Oh, that was the time of the Great Migration. But when we look at the Harlem Renaissance and just all the things that went on, we saw that it was a time of cultural awakening. Our artists, like I say, the artists, the musicians, all of these people were just amazing. There were some names. It was a time of intellectual development as well. Some of the great intellectuals, and I'm just going to read a few names that are associated with the Harlem Renaissance. Alan Locke, Countee Cullen, Angela Weld Grimke, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, James Weldon Johnson, who with his brother wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing, Claude McKay, Josephine Baker, Charles Sidney Gilpin, Bill Bojangles Robinson, and some musicians and composers and singers, Marian Anderson, Louis Armstrong, and we're going to talk about him more in a minute, Count Basie, U.B. Blake, Cab Calloway, Dorothy Dandridge, Duke Ellington, Adelaide Hall, Roland Hayes, Fletcher Henderson, Billie Holiday, Lena Horne, Jelly Roll Martin, Ma Rainey, Noble Sissle, Bessie Smith, Fats Waller, Ethel Waters, and some artists such as James Vanderzee and Meta Warwick Fuller. That is just to name a few of the hundreds of people that were around in this time that were artists here. Now, what happened? You think about the Cotton Club and things like that. So, white people in New York would come down to Harlem, and it was considered coming down to Harlem. Um, to see this talent because they were talented people. They were great artists, and I named some of the ones you may have heard of, and you know of their great talent, and it still lives today. Their names are known. There are many whose names may not be as known, but I named those that many people heard of. So I wanted you to see this is just these are just some of the few. So they will come to the Cotton Club, they will come to other places to hear this talent, to see this talent, because that's what it was all about. And it was really, it was for the black performers. It was their way to express themselves and to perform. And for a lot of the white folks come and watch it, it was just, it was something to do. It made them trendy. It made them cool. It wasn't that they even saw these as, we still weren't quite seen as people. It was just something fun to watch, but it's real. We enjoyed our talent. We knew who we were. I want to share with you one of my favorite poems from that era, and that is I Too by Langston Hughes. And with the reason I want to share it, so much of what was happening in the world then is happening now. The poems, the words, unfortunately, are just as true today in some ways as they were then. I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too sing America. When you think about this, we may have our place at the table, but some of us, many still don't want us there. They're still not yet fully ashamed and still don't see how beautiful we are. So I love Langston Hughes, and I went to undergraduate at the University of Kansas, and he spent part of his young life in Kansas, and we did a couple of. I remember working with a group of friends, and we did something dedicated to Langston Hughes when they dedicated a room at one of the libraries to him. So I've always been a fan, and that poem, as I say, the sentiment of that poem still sort of rings true today. Are we still seen? We may not be sent to the kitchen table, but we aren't always invited to the boardroom table if you look at America now. So I think it's important that yeah, let's just see, where are we? But we still sing America because we know how beautiful we are. And whether they see it and are ashamed doesn't matter. We know it. Looking at the Harlem Renaissance, how did it end? What stopped this great cultural exchange? Well, I always say it's follow the money, and we're going to see. The end of the Harlem Renaissance creative boom began with the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. It wavered, until the end of Prohibition, which meant white patrons no longer sought out illegal alcohol in uptown clubs. Back to white folks ended prohibition because it was about money. Too much prohibition did not stop people from drinking, and too much money was going that the government couldn't get a handle on. So that's a simplified version, but really it goes back to money. When that happened, um, the white patrons' money flowing into a lot of the clubs um, dried up. There was a stock market crash, the Great Depression, and things changed. Just overall, things changed. So by 1935, many pivotal, pivotal Harlem residents had moved on to seek work. They were replaced by a continuous flow of people coming up from the South, however. And the final nail in the coffin in the Harlem Renaissance, what happened in 1935, was a race riot. It broke out following the arrest of a young shoplifter, resulting in 3 dead. He was an accused shoplifter. Hundreds injured and millions of dollars in property damage. The riot was the final death of the Harlem Renaissance. It just killed that era. But when you think about Tulsa and other things that happened, our country is known to end things that were going great for us because someone was alleged to do something and then there was a riot to follow. Just something to think about. But it was an awesome time. So I encourage you, if you don't know a lot about the Harlem Renaissance and the people of the Harlem Renaissance, study it. Find out just how talented and so much of who we are today is grounded in that. And when you look at some of the poetry and writings of that time, you're going to find that a lot rings true today of what they wrote. As I said, some of the sentiment still there. Amazing. And not necessarily a good amazing when you think about some of the racist things that it still says about our country. Um, the last thing I want to look at is our music. You know, we're talking about the Harlem Renaissance coming out of that. Just looking at our rich history of music that we created here and its depths that comes out of Africa. And we're going to see that in so many of the different genres. So I just want to look at the history of the blues, the history of jazz, the history of R&B, and the history of hip hop and rap. All of that in the next 5 or 6 minutes. Yeah, we're just going to sort of talk about it. One of the original genres of music that's we are credited with creating is the blues. And it actually is considered to have started in the late 1860s by African Americans. And it has its roots in traditional African music. Some of the and the work songs and the Negro spiritual. So actually, let me back up and talk about the Negro spiritual, which even predates that. Um, the Negro spiritual. These were songs sung by slaves, but they weren't just happy slaves or happy coons as they were called, really singing music. The spirituals were used to signal to others that things to do. So when they were going to escape, they couldn't just say, "Yo, it's time to go. We leaving." But as they would sing to the slave masters for their entertainment, they were signaling to others, "Tonight, this is what we're going to do." So if you heard "Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." That meant it's time for us to get to the river because tonight we're leaving. Slaves were not just staying there all the time. They did escape and escaped a lot. And as I said, these were some of the ways they sang. So we hear these songs and we may not fully understand. They were codes. They were saying, it's time to go. Even swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. They were ready to go. Get on this train, get on this chariot. It's time to go. So the songs had meaning. They were signals. But of course, since the slave masters didn't think the slaves were smart, they weren't going to even consider that this was something that could happen. So that's our earliest music here in this country. And then there were the blues. The blues. What is considered to be the founder of the blues was father of the blues was W.C. Handy. And when he wrote his songs, of course, initially they weren't accepted. So he wrote his first song, the first original blues song was called Memphis Blues. He wrote it, um, and he got a little money for it. Thank you, Rose. I see the compliment that you have a nice voice. I thank you. Um, Memphis Blues was considered to be the first blues song, and he only got a little bit of money for it because he was selling it through someone else. So he was like, you know what, this is not the way to go. He knew he had something there. So he set up his own company, Blues Handy Brothers Music Company. And in 1914, he published the St. Louis Blues. And this song was even bigger than the Memphis Blues. And he made a little more money because he could sell his own music. So we think about how um, that's like in 1914. We knew that we were smart people, we were entrepreneurs. We knew that we had to make our own. And that is not a new phenomena. That is why he was like, oh no. But the blues were came out of the African music tradition. They were African work song and the spirituals. And the blues, if you ever listen to the blues, it has its own cadence, and there's a certain, I won't go into the musical terms, but it has its own a specific rhythm that it's the blues. And the blues, people say, well, this blues, that's a sad song. But you know what? When you listen to the blues, it doesn't make you feel sad. It makes you feel good. It's something about the rhythm, na 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 na, and then just the rhythm that goes in. And you listen to it, you will laugh at the lyrics. Some of them are just hilarious. Some of them are sad. Somebody died, somebody killed, da da da. It's all in these lyrics, but you listen to them, it is not a sad feeling. It's just a lighthearted feeling. And the reason being, music is very powerful. One of the things when you study and as we look at music in this short time, the rhythm, when we get to rap and talk about the rhythm and the powerfulness of the drums, they generate a feeling in you. And remember, the blues came out of African tradition of using that particular scale that is akin to the African continent. So when if the blues sprang up in people because it gave its own feeling of who we are, and then emerged from that came the jazz. Now the jazz is credited with starting in New Orleans. It's the birthplace of the jazz and one of the earliest um, persons in this genre was Louis Armstrong. And he was born in New Orleans, um, and he was known as Satchmo. And when we think about jazz has, evolved into so many, there are different kinds of jazz today. There was the big band, there's now fusion, there's, just so many kinds of jazz. But jazz is another one. It was um, a music genre built on improvisation, and improvisation is really how you're feeling. You're in the vibe, you're feeling that moment. And if you listen to jazz, people as far back as Thelonious Monk and people like that, there's a name that comes to mind. And you're playing and you have the song, you have the sheet music that's there. But then the pianist gets his part to play. Then the bass player gets their little part. And then the saxophonists or just different whoever's there, they get their own part. And what they're playing is improvisation. It's not on the page. So a lot of jazz is about the feel. How are they feeling it that day? And how they play it on Monday might not be how it's played on Tuesday when it comes to their own improv part. So jazz is about feeling. And that's another genre of music that's a part of our culture that we should know about and celebrate. And then there's the rhythm and blues, R&B. Now, R&B, the term R&B actually came about to replace the term race music. Back in the 50s, during the American Bandstand age in the 50s, American Billboard, black music was called race music. That term, even then, didn't sound good. I forgot the name of the gentleman who uh, he was a music executive and he termed it um, rhythm and blues because it was coming out of the blues era and it had its own rhythm like no other, which we do know that. So it had a rhythm and a feel that was different from music in the white culture. So it had this rhythm and it was based in the blues and it was influenced by the blues. And just that sound, very different, but that's where its influence grew out of. So they felt that rhythm and blues was much less derogatory and offensive than the term race music. Race music is how it was just referred to when they would talk about playing a black song, a song by an African American artist. So that's how rhythm and blues. Rhythm and blues is still with us today. It emerged from that time in the early 50s, coming out of the swing and jazz and blues. You see how one genre kind of plays on the other. Thank you, Jarmis. His name was Jerry Wexler, and then Robert Palmer. Those are the ones that were credited with coming up with um, rhythm and blues because we don't want to call it race music. Thank you. Love my audience out there. As we quickly move on, because this 45 minutes is going so fast tonight. The last, no, two more. Um, Gospel music. A lot of our music, really all of this comes out of gospel. We talked about the Negro spiritual and that rhythm and how it came to play in the gospel music, how it came to play in the blues, how it impacted jazz, it impacts R&B, and it also definitely impacts gospel music. When we think of gospel music, we can think of now popular gospel music, and we can think how whenever there's a new genre, a new style of gospel music, it gets pushed aside. Church music before gospel music, before the 1930s, was still the sacred hymn, pretty much like was sung in the white church. Um, that didn't last too long. Oh gosh, Thomas Dorsey. When Thomas Dorsey wrote his first gospel song, Precious Lord, it was considered just horrible secular music. Now, when we think about it, we think of it as old timey stuff. But then it was not accepted. And that song would be Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. And it goes on. That was sung at Martin Luther King's funeral. It was a traditional song. But when it first came out, that rhythm, that syncopation was not accepted. It was too secular. It was too bluesy. The feel and the sound had that blues sound, and it was rejected. It continued to grow, and more artists came on. And you think about in when artist Kirk Franklin, man, when he first came on, he was just too secular. Now we look at as hip hop, um, the hip hop rhythm has come into the gospel arena, come into the church. It's not always accepted. But when we think about it, music is a way to express ourselves. So why shouldn't whatever is in the world side, why shouldn't we be able to enjoy it on the in the church? But yes, gospel music. So and so many R&B artists, even a lot of your hip hop artists, your jazz artists, they grew up in the church. Your jazz artists, many of in the musicians got a chance to first play in the church. Go on, baby, you sound so good. They were encouraged in the church. Your blues artists, a lot of them began in the church, even though their music was not accepted. And then lastly, I want to quickly talk in the next 2 minutes about hip hop. Hip hop started out around the 70s, so it's our newest genre of music, would be hip hop and rap. I'm going to combine them together for the sake of time. But hip hop and rap began in New York, in the Bronx, is where it's credited with beginning. And that's where the MCs would play over house music in the block parties in New York. And um, it became a really strong movement that still type of music that still exists today. Now, what I wanted to point out about this, and I'll miss a lot of the other stuff just because of time, is that when we listen to hip hop, like it or not, and there's some good and bad with hip hop, and when we think of rap and we think of the misogyny and the negative lyrics, but let's talk about the rhythm of hip hop for just a moment. One of the things, going back to blues, going back to the spiritual, it was the feel, it was the rhythm, it was the scales you used. That rhythm is really important. So one of the reasons that hip hop resonates is because it is related to um, the beat of the drum, the African drum, and the importance of the beating of the drum. Um, Drumming, you tell stories. You can tell stories with drumming. I'm not going to, in time, be able to get into a lot of it, but there are stories you tell via drumming. And the rhythm makes you feel a certain way. And that's why some music, even in the rhythm, it incites action and just powerful feeling, a strong feeling. It might make you want to go fight, literally. You know that because that particular cadence, that particular rhythm stirs up feelings, and sometimes the drumming just can make you feel very mellow. And that's why when you listen to music, hip hop and rap, It has a strong feeling. It will resonate because of the importance of the rhythm. Let us just understand that our music has been here for a long time. From as long as we have been in this country, music has been a part of who we are. And the music has continued to go on. The spirituals, there's still, at least in February and Black History Month, you might hear some spirituals just to understand their history. The blues is still played, jazz still there, rhythm and blues moving on every day, gospel still there, still evolving, hip hop, rap, and all of our music, you all. These are music forms that we started. They have all been appropriated by other cultures. However, it's ours. And let us never forget that that is ours. So tonight, I want it to be, as I said, lighthearted yet informative because remember, everything we do impacts our mental health. Listening to music definitely impacts our mental health. The whole creativity, as I talked about the Harlem Renaissance, reading literature, reading poetry, writing your own literature, writing your own poetry. That makes us who we are. So tap into your creative spirit. Don't forget about where we came from in our slavery because it's who we are. We are, wow, out of time because I try to keep to my time. I have a poem that I want to share, and I think I'll just begin with it on our next week because we have another week in Black History Month, and regardless of our topic, and I believe it's Black History 365. And as I said at the beginning of the month, each week I think I'll drop one little fact about our history that we may not know. So I want to end, as I always do, by our call to action. This week's call to action: remember to take care of your own mental health. Here in Texas, right now, as we've gone through this crazy state where we're stuck inside because the streets are crazy, on top of COVID, and we were already here, but this is another crazy time. Take care of yourself and take care of your loved ones. Just call and check on people to see, do you have lights? Do you have power? They may not, and maybe you can't get to them, but you can encourage them just by being there and asking about them. Check on those around you. COVID hasn't gone anywhere. People still, older people especially, still aren't getting out. Maybe you'll be the one to go and, can I pick up your groceries for you? Can I cook something for you? You don't have to go in, you can take it and just hand it off to them and move on. But do something for someone. You'll find when you're doing something for someone, it makes you feel good. And yes, remain politically astute. There's a lot going on and we need to be aware. And lastly, mask up because wearing is caring. And as I like to always end by saying, and as Janice says, please continue to pray for these Texans battling this winter weather. Those in other parts of the country don't understand, but if you've never had this winter weather, you don't know what to do with it. The asphalt in our streets are made differently than the asphalt in northern areas because our streets and roads are designed to manage extreme heat, not extreme cold. We don't have snowplows because we don't get snow. So you can easily shut us down. Now, some of it we won't get into politically why we don't have power, but just some of the basics is we're not equipped for it. So please pray for us here in Texas. Um, if you are someone who finds yourself needing help, it's okay to get help for mental health because mental health is health. It's all part of our health. I am Bronwyn Lucas, the caring counselor. Hope you enjoyed Thinking Thursday. If you would like to contact me, you can look on my Facebook page and you will see the phone number, which is 682 272 3949. Enjoy yourself, and those of you in Texas, stay warm. See you next week.